Hello guys, welcome to episode 4 of making an online Pokemon game in GameMaker. And in this episode I did promise that I was going to be doing some messages between the server and the client over here. But before that, I would like to do a little bit of cleanup on this debug function, this class, because there's some things I'd like to add. First, I want to add a clear function, which is very simple. We'll just say clear, and we're in the debug right now, the debug class, and I'm just going to make it so that's a ds list clear messages. That way we can reset all of them, the messages, get rid of them. The second thing I would like to do is change these to use relative positions instead of absolute positions. So instead of using values between like 0 and the room width and the height, we'll be using values like 0.5, 0.3, and that way it'll maintain its aspect ratio or its size, no matter the size of the screen. So how are we going to do this? This will be pretty easy. Instead of setting this to room width and height by default, we'll set it to 1 by default. That's the first thing. And then the X and Y position needs to be multiplied by that size. So let's get the size of the screen. And it's not going to be the room width and height. It's going to be the width and height of the GUI frame, because we're going to be doing this in the draw GUI event instead. So we'll say GUI W equals display get GUI width, and then we can do the same thing for the height. GUI H, and then down here, after all of this, we'll just multiply everything. So we'll say X times equals GUI width, Y times equals GUI height, and then width times equals GUI width, and height times equals GUI height. And that should be good. For the X and Y position, I'm going to default these to 0 and 0. Y equals 0. And here, instead of saying -1 and -1, actually I could just set these to just 1 by default. And then I can get rid of these two if statements. That'll be a little cleaner. So by default, this will be 0, 0, 1, 1. So by default, it'll take up the entire screen. The size, we can make this relative to, I suppose. We'll make it, So yeah, the question is, how do we want to handle this variable? Right now, this is an absolute position, so it's 50 pixels. So it's 50. Oh yeah, 50 pixels. But we could set it to be like, I don't know, like 0.5, and say that that's 50% of the entire height here. And yeah, I think we'll do that. We'll do 1/3 by default, which I don't know if we can do that. We'll do 1/6. So it'll be a fraction. So it'll be a fraction of this total height here. So I can just do size times equals height there. So size is now a relative position of the height of the entire window. So 1/6 would mean that we can fit 6 lines of messages onto the screen itself, which might not be enough. Might need to make that a little bigger, but for now that'll be fine. I'd like to add in padding as well. We didn't do that before. I think that's under the draw event still. Before we were just doing this weird thing with size. So instead I'm just going to create a var padding, and we'll set that equal to, this could be an absolute position, so we'll just do 16. Doesn't have to be relative. So padding there, and this delta y minus equals size, I believe needs to go up. Whoa. Oh yeah, okay, I thought that was wrong for a second. Nope. Yeah, so I think this delta y needs to go up 1 line. So we subtract it first, and that should be good. Now we need to fix this under the drawing parts, which is under the network control. So if it's the client, the width can now just be 3/4, and the height can be 1/4 for this here. And yeah, I'll just do this. I'll just hard code it in. We'll use some magic numbers. So our X will be 1/3 of the screen. Height will be 0. The X2 will be 2/3. So it'll be from the 1/3 to the 2/3 position of the screen. And this might not be enough, but it should be fine for now. And the second Y position can just be 1/5 maybe. and then the screen height, the height of the lines, will just make it the same as the default 1.6. That should be fine. For this, we can get rid of all the arguments now. And if we run this, we'll run the server. So the server's fine. And then if I come into the A/B testing and execute this, it looks a little nicer. Well, yeah, I just realized we're not doing this in the draw GUI event right now, so we'll need to fix that too. If I press F1, yeah, so because we're not doing it in the GUI event, nothing is working there. So I can right click this on draw, change event, draw GUI, and now if I run this instead, it should look a little better. Let's go back to here, execute this. If I press F1 here, oh, it's still not working. This second Y position is a little off. The text looks the same too. Did I mess something up? I probably did, I'll be honest. So let's go back to this and look. See what we did. So it's 0011 by default. Display get GUI width, display get GUI height, the GUI width, GUI height, exit. Yep, that should be good. Then width and height are multiplied as well. Correct numbers, size is height. It's possible we're doing something funky with the positioning itself, but it doesn't look like it. So padding, X should be, oh no, that's not right. X, Y, surface. What's the size of the surface? Width and height. So what's going on is this is X2, Y2, not the width and height. That's the issue. So X2, Y2. And exit is the X1, Y1. We'll make all of these X, Y. Yeah, that's fine. Var X and var Y. And this is going to be equal to X1 times that, Y2 times that. Sorry, I had a bit of a cough there. And we're getting an error. I don't know if X works. Why is this giving me an error? Or it says it has an error. It shouldn't though. Unless X isn't proper. I could do delta X and delta Y. Yeah, that works. So we'll do delta X, delta Y here instead of the original X and Y. Otherwise, I could use X and Y. It doesn't really affect anything. It does make the object itself move technically, but the object's not moving anything, so it doesn't matter. So we'll do this. Var width, var height, and this needs to be equal to, we'll do braces, and we'll do X2 minus X1 multiplied by the width, and the same thing here, Y2 minus Y1 times the height. And that looks good. The only change we have to make is, so here, we'll change this from delta X to XX and YY. I know my naming convention isn't the greatest here, so XX and YY will be the position that the GUI, the surface, needs to be displayed. Delta X and delta Y, I guess, is just where we are rendering to at this current moment. And then down here when we do draw surface, we'll just do XXYY. And that should be everything. Hopefully now it works. I'll just run this there. It's definitely not working because this is pure black. So we did something else wrong again. Doesn't surprise me. Again, X2 minus X1 times the width, Y2 minus Y1 times the height. Yeah, what is going on here? That's even worse than before, unless it's not the correct colors. So we are doing this draw log right here, which takes in no parameters, so we should have 0, 0, 1, 1. If we look at this again, so X1 is right there, that's 0, 0, and the width, which we're defining here, is 1 minus 0, so 1 times the GUI width, and the height is, yeah, 1 times the GUI height. So we're doing something silly here, X, X, Y, Y. Let's just try getting a message to display and seeing what happens. I saw something for a minute. Here it looks funky. It's the Y position. The Y position is not correct. So YY is equal to Y2. Oh, that should be Y1. That's probably Y. Let's run this again. Okay, there we go. And now if I run this, press F1 here, it looks very small, which it is. I figured that would happen. I don't have any way of logging anything here to see what it looks like, but that's fine. We'll just make this a little bigger quickly, and then we will continue on. So var p equals, we'll do 1/8, and then here we can just do p, and here instead of 2/3 we'll do 1 minus p. And for this we'll make it a little bigger, so we'll do 1/4 of the screen. If I run this and run the server, or the client I mean, I can open this up. Yeah, that looks a little better. Alright, so let's get a message sent now. We are already halfway through the video, 11 minutes in. If it goes a little longer, I'm sorry, but I did want to do a little bit of cleanup there, so hopefully it is well worth it. So how do we get a message sent then? Let's go to the server and see what we can do. The main place for a message is this on async function. This is where the meat of everything happens. Same with on the client, the meat happens there. So much so that I might need to, I'm going to take the data here when we get to that, and we'll separate that into its own function. But for now, under the server, we have this connection thing. We'll need 2 more, case network type disconnect, and we'll do something there, and then case network type data, and we'll do something there. And I'm going to copy this data one because in the client, oh, we already have it actually. Yep, so for the client, we only need data. We won't need to worry about connecting or disconnecting because the client doesn't deal with any other users, so it shouldn't be having any connection and disconnection events happening. It might fire when it connects to the server, which is fine, but that's not the end-all goal. That's the client doesn't need to handle anything with that. That should be the server side only. Hopefully. We'll see what happens in the future, but for now, it's just this. And we have this log happening in the connect. We can do something else. We can say disconnected, and we'll do an error instead. For the connect, we'll do a success. And for the data, we will do a log. And we'll just say got some data. Fix that. Okay. Everything should be working there. And then we actually need the data, which I don't think I ever provided it, so I'm going to say end data here. And I'll do the same thing for the client. We'll add in this data packet, and under the object network control, under async event, we need to add that. And let's go to the async event, var end data equals async load data, and then we can provide that, comma end data, comma end data. So now we're providing the data from this async load into these functions, and that should only be available to us through this network type data anyway, so that should be fine. Anyway, before anything else, we need to keep track of this socket. So how do we do that? Well, that's going to happen in the connect. When we connect, we need to keep track of, okay, we have this socket now. Let's look through it and check it. And then we need to also eventually provide that socket identification number, not the socket itself, but its ID, back to the client so it knows this is what my value is. This is what my client number is. So let's make a variable in the server. We'll just call it sockets for now, and it'll equal to an empty array. We could do a ds list create. That would be fine too. Technically, this is more efficient. It's a lot more efficient to deal with socket or with ds lists. Otherwise, we could do an array create of size. What size do we want? Network.max clients. This is also a little more efficient. We pre-create an array with a certain size. If we start with an empty array, this works as well because we can just add on to it, and GameMaker allows for that. But every time we add on to the array, it technically has to recreate the entire array, which takes up time. It's not that big of a deal. You don't have to worry about it too much. But if we just do this, it'll create it one size right at the start, and we don't have to worry about it. Okay, so, and we need to provide a value. We're going to provide it with no one, so everything will be populated with the value none or no one, so it'll just be nothing basically. This is equal to the number -4 if you didn't know. At least I assume it still is. In the past, no one was the same as just typing in -4, but they could have changed that. I don't know. Anyway, here, first thing we need to do is we need to find a empty slot. So what I'm going to do is say var id, var id. I would do id, but it's a used variable, so we'll just do this, and we'll set it equal to no one. And then under here, I'll do a for var I equals 0, I is less than, and I will say, we could say sockets.length, or I could do network.maxClients I++. And I'm going to iterate through the sockets and find the first socket that is no one. So I will say if sockets I equals no one, we'll do two things. First, we'll set id equal to I, and then we'll break out of the loop, because we don't need to iterate through the entire array if we've already found an available socket. Here I will say if id equals no one. Well, we'll say doesn't equal none. Well, yeah, we'll do if it equals no one. So if this basically is saying we weren't able to find an available socket. We could do debug.error, and we'll say no available sockets, and then I can return, because we can't do anything, we can't connect the client. Otherwise, I will say sockets I equals n socket, and this is wrong. It's not sockets I, it's sockets ID. So what are we doing here? We are iterating through every socket, finding the first available socket in that array. If none was found, we print out the message no available sockets. Otherwise, we will set the socket in that array to be the socket that we are getting from this variable here. Alright, and that should all be good. We can actually print something out here. We can say debug.success connected on socket, and I will do plus string ID. So we'll print out that we successfully connected somebody. And yeah, we can try this out, I suppose. Nothing wrong with that. If we execute the client in green, it'll say connected on socket 0. And we might need to make this text smaller. That's very big now. Let's do that quick. Oh, network. It's very easy to do. You just go to this draw GUI and you just 0, 0, 1, 1. We'll make it 1/10. 0, 0, 1, 1. That's just the default values. That's why I'm setting that. So I could have also done commas, but whatever. Execute. Yeah, it's a little smaller. Okay. Hopefully you guys can still read that. I'm assuming you can, because it's bigger than the text on the code. So I would assume you could. Server. Alright, back to the server. Now we need to come through and tell the client, hey, this is your identification. This ID right here, this is who you are. You are going to be registered under this value, in this case 0, because there are only 0 of them. So let's do that quickly. I haven't done this in a long time. This is related to buffers. I was trying to remember the thing. It's a buffer, and we'll have to create a whole host of different functions related to this, but for now I'm just going to create a buffer equals buffer create size 1024, because that's what I normally do. What else we need? Buffer type grow, I believe. what's it called? It's just a buffer grow. Alignment is 1. The size is the only thing you really need to worry about. Buffer grow and 1. That's what you want. Grow is what happens when you go beyond this 1024. So if it ends up getting to be at a buffer that is bigger than that, like you add in more data, the buffer itself will just get bigger. It'll double in the size usually. It could be a little less than double, but usually it doubles the size so that you don't have an overflow. There's other options too. There is buffer. I don't know what fast is. Buffer fix though will make it so that it if you overflow, it stays the same size and no more data can be added onto it. There should also be wrap. Yep, buffer wrap, which will make the data start going to the beginning. And yeah, I don't know what fast does. I'm just gonna stick with grow though. Buffer bool and all these we'll use later, but for now, buffer grow. All right, so now we need to write to the buffer. So there's 3 steps involved in sending data from a buffer to somebody. First step, we need to set the position of the buffer to be the start. So think of a buffer like an array of data, and it's just filled with zeros right now. But there's a cursor. So maybe the cursor is right now located at this position. Oh gosh, right there. So let's say we write a 5 to this position, then this cursor will move up and be put over here. And then I can write a 3 to that position, and because it's overflowed, instead of going there, it'll go into the next position and it'll grow bigger. Sorry, I had a cough again. So yeah, so we'll be at this position, and then you can write more data. Let's rewrite a 10. Then this cursor will move up, and so on and so forth. So the first step is to reset the cursor back to the start. How do you do that? It's buffer seek, and we want to pass in the buffer, pass in the type, so it's buffer seek start. And there's end and relative, but we just want start. So we're going to seek the start of the buffer and offset, so we can set it to be like 1 off, 2 off, 3 off, whatever, but we're just going to set it to 0. So no offset, just right at the beginning. Then we can do a buffer write, because again, we want to write data to the very first point. We need to pass in the buffer, the type, and this is where we can do buffer boolean. There's f's, which are floats. S is a string, I believe. I could be wrong about that. No, S is signed. Sorry. I was like, wait a minute, that doesn't seem right, because there's a buffer string there in text. So you want to have F for float, S for signed, and U for unsigned. So we want unsigned really right now, in particular unsigned 8. If you press Control period, I think, Alt period, Control Shift period. Control middle mouse click. Is that what it is? Okay, yeah. I was trying to remember. You can open the docs, and you can view more about this buffers right here. So it's unsigned 8 integer. So unsigned means that it's a positive value. You cannot have negative values with unsigned. With signed values, you can have negatives, but you have a less range. So if it's an unsigned 8, that means there's 8 bits, which means you can have any value from 0 to 255. That's your limit. U8 is from 0 to 255. And maybe this is hard to see. Let's zoom in a little bit. So 0 to 255, a signed value, even though it can go negative, now it's negative 128 to 127. So you can do negatives, but instead of being 255, it's 127. You can do a U16, so 16 bits. This has a much bigger range, 0 to 65,000. You can do 32, which is going to get you into the billions, and 64, which is 0 to a number that I don't even know. And then you can even go to U32, or U64, sorry. So yeah, on the side 64, way bigger than I know what to do with, so... Yeah, the downside with bigger numbers, you may be tempted to just like, oh, why don't we just make everything U32 or U64? Like, why not just make it as big as we can go? Well, More data means you got to send more data from the server to the client, and you want to reduce the amount of bits you have to send to the client server. It'll speed up performance. If you make everything really big and make it grow, it'll just slow things down. So we're just going to try and condense things down as much as possible. So how big of a range do we want for this value? Well, right now our max clients is just 100, I believe. So we can only have 100 clients, or no, we actually only have 10. So yeah, we could just do 0 to 255, and that would be fine because that is more than 100, obviously. But I'm going to do a 16, a unsigned U16. So just in case we want to go beyond 255 clients, we can. I think GameMaker allows for 1,000, around 1,024 maybe. So we could do that, but yeah, I'm just going to make it 16 for now just so that we have that extra room in case we want to grow. So how do we do this now? Scroll down, buffer right, we were going to do a unsigned 16. Yep, we want unsigned. We don't want negatives. And I mean, yeah, I was going to say we could do negative so that it allows for -4 just in case, like a no one. We can send no one just in case, but no, it'll be U, and then the value, of course, is the ID. That was a lot of explanation. I'm sorry, but I figured you don't want to know this much at least because a lot of server stuff is just dealing with sending this data, and then we're gonna do gosh, I can't remember. Network. Send socket, I believe. Send buffer. Send packet. There we go. The socket we want to send through is going to be sockets ID. I could just pass an end socket because we're just sending it to him anyway, but I really want to just send it. I want to do this for a little bit of consistency because we won't always have access to this end socket. So we're going to send it through this socket here. The buffer ID, that's just the buffer, and then the size. We don't want to send the entire buffer because the entire buffer is currently 1024 bytes, I believe. I believe it's in bytes. Yeah, that sounds right. So we don't want to send that entire thing because we don't need to. We only need to send the data we wrote. And it just so happens the best way to get how big it is by getting this cursor's position. Because right now we just wrote the number, we wrote the number, let's say 5. And now this cursor moves up. And now this cursor is at position 1, which just happens to be the number of bytes we also want to send. So we can just do buffer tell and then buffer. And it just so happens that buffer tell gets us that cursor position, which also happens to be how much data we want to send. So it's kind of a coincidence, but kind of not. It just happens to work out, and so yeah, you can just do buffer tell. This wouldn't work if we didn't seek the start because we'd have a lot of weird offsetting stuff, but yeah, this should send data straight to the client. And if we go to the client here, when we receive the data, I guess we could just try something. So end data is going to be a buffer now. So we can do stuff with the buffer. I believe that's how it works. I don't think we have to convert it to a buffer. Don't fully remember. How long are we looking? Yeah, we're looking at 28 minutes. This is going to be a long video, guys. I'm sorry. Hopefully you guys appreciate the explanation, though. So here we can do some buffer stuff here. So we'll do buffer seek start. Buffer seek, and then end data buffer seek start, offset of 0, and then we need to read the buffer. So we'll store this in a variable var ID equals buffer read instead of buffer write, the end data, and now we need to again provide what type it is. So it's going to be the buffer U16, and this is important. You have to make sure you match whatever you wrote here or whatever you wrote in the server, this buffer U16. You have to make sure you match that with this value here. If you don't match it, you're going to get errors, and let me tell you from experience, that is a cause of a lot of bugs that really, really frustrate me because you'll be getting data back and forth and you'll be like, oh my gosh, where did I mess up? Why isn't this proper data? Or even worse, when you don't get an error and it's just wrong information and everything just looks weird and you're like, why is this character moving in really weird ways? It's well because you didn't match up the correct thing. Anyway, here I can now actually we'll just print it. Debug.log, and we'll just log the ID. We'll convert it to a string ID, and we'll say my ID is plus that string, and we'll see if this works. Unlikely. If it worked first time, I'd be very surprised. So we come in here, we got our server running, we execute the client, and yep, we got an error. This says connected, so it did connect on the server side, but somebody broke. It looks like the client broke on line 15. Buffer seeked, and data. So, brings up a good point. I'm guessing that I was wrong. I'm guessing that this isn't a buffer right off the bat, but instead it was something else, which is weird because I would have really expected that to be a buffer. So how can we solve this issue? We could look it up, Google, or I can cheat. I can come into here to this async load and control middle mouse click, and we'll open up the documentation in GameMaker itself. And it's a little big for me right now. So let's scroll down and we'll find networking. And this should have a bunch of good information that you should read. But in particular, receiving data. When you have a network type data, which is our event, buffer. We wanted buffer. It's called buffer, not data. I thought there was one called data. I could have been wrong. Huh, maybe not. Okay. So instead of data, this should be buffer. That's basically it. Now, if I run the server and run the client, it works. And if I press F1 here, you can see we did log my ID as 0, which is the same here. And I can run another version here, connected on socket 1. And this client now says my ID is 1. And if I do it again, you can probably guess the third person is going to have an ID of 2. So everything seems to be working. I can also close one of these and it'll disconnect to the client. Come to here, disconnect. Come here, disconnect. And yeah, there's one more thing I would like to do though. One of those things was cough again. I'm getting over a cold, so I think I already said that. But the other thing I would like to do is remove this server, this client. But I don't know if we're going to do that right now because it's a little more work. You can do it for a homework assignment if you want. Basically, you have to come into this disconnect, go into the end socket, and iterate through to find the ID and remove it. So yeah, I'll leave that for you guys for next time, but in the start of next time, we will deal with that. That'll be the first thing, but we are also going to take this right here and merge it out into its own kind of structure. So we're going to have some good functions that we can do that allow us to easily do all this information without having to think about it too much. Kind of like we're going to simplify these functions basically, which will help us down the line. We'll basically wrap this up in our own custom functions. Anyway, until then, I'll see you guys next time.